whatnot, and for those that were not able to make this meeting. Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. This is the final community meeting for the Golden Gate Fire Protection District 2025 Community Wildfire Protection Plan. I'll first start with myself and the Ember Alliance team. So my name is Evan Briscoe. I am the project manager for this Community Wildfire Protection Plan. We also have on the call John Henry. John, if you want to introduce yourself really quickly.
Yeah, John Henry, GIS specialist with the Ember Alliance. Um, Made all the maps for the CWPP.
Awesome. We also have our colleague Carrie joining us. Carrie's going to be running the tech for us tonight. So that's going to be super helpful. So if you have any questions throughout our presentation, we will have time at the end to address your questions and answer those. So you can either use the raise your hand feature here in Zoom, or you can write it into the chat. Carrie will be monitoring those and then bringing those up at the end for us. So we will ask you all to kind of hold those questions until the end. If you do have something that you don't want to forget, you can write that in the chat and we will address that here afterwards. At the end, we'll have time to address that and give you all time to ask the questions that you have as well. So I also wanted to just go through for this CWPP. What we do is we have an advisory committee. This advisory committee is made up of land managers and other subject matter experts, as well as representatives from the community. And so I just wanted to acknowledge all of the work that this advisory committee did for us throughout this process. We really relied on them to help ground truth our data and give us really good on the ground insights so that we could tailor the CWPP to your community. So we had representatives from obviously the Fire Protection District, Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, Jefferson County Open Space, Denver Water. We had our community representatives, Colorado State Forest Service, Clear Creek Watershed and Forest Health Partnership, Colorado Division of Fire Prevention and Control, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, Golden Fire, Excel, and United Power. So again, these folks and these organizations were instrumental in carrying out this CWPP process and writing the final document. Kyle, did you have anything you wanted to say, just kind of an introduction before I get started in on my spiel here?
No, I think I'll wait until the end and we'll go through some of the stuff that has to do with the district and then we'll kind of do closing remarks. So up to you here, Evan.
Okay, perfect. Alrighty, so let's go ahead and get started. So for the CWPP, this was a slide that I introduced at our community kickoff meeting way back, I guess it would have been December of last year. And so what this slide was trying to convey is just why is a CWPP important, or Community Wildfire Protection Plan important for the community? And what we had come up with was that for many communities, wildfire is often not an if, but when and how. And so what a community wildfire protection plan does is it evaluates your risk, or at least the risk that's specific to your community, and it determines relative risk within your community. It also incorporates community values into planning. So we did a lot of community outreach as well as partner outreach in order to incorporate those perspectives, those expertise, and those community values into our risk assessments as well as our planning for the CWPP. We also use this to ground truth our data. So, our results are only as good as the data that we collect. And so after collecting data at each step, we engaged with the advisory committee for feedback and input in order to tailor our data and make it specific to Golden Gate and make sure that it was as accurate as possible before we conducted the analyses that I'll talk about throughout. We also, through this process, we identify priority projects for your community. And so we prioritize projects to be the most effective in mitigating wildfire risk. And this is scientifically backed and tailored to your community. And so we take the input from the community as well as the input from the advisory committee and our project partners in order to identify those projects. And those projects are for the benefit to reduce the risk of wildfire for the benefit of the entire community. So tying this CWPP into the Jefferson County update that occurred last year, this CWPP we felt was very important because it was tailored to your community. So when we look at Jefferson County, this is a much higher county-wide view. So it's strategic, it's more higher level. The process was outlined for identifying risk and identifying priorities, but there weren't specific priorities within each community. So working off of Jefferson County's CWPP update with this 2025 Golden Gate, this is focusing, it allowed us to focus further into your community, and we were able to specifically tailor it to your community's needs and values. And so there were certain data and certain things that we were able to collect that was specific to the Golden Gate community that wasn't incorporated before or identified before in the earlier CWPPs. Some of those included roadways, highly valued infrastructure, various structures within Golden Gate. And then what this allowed us to do is when we conducted our analyses, these were incorporated into that so that we could see the exposure of some of these really highly valued resources and assets within your community, their exposure to wildfire and the risk that exists there. So this allowed us to also identify various projects and prioritize them in order to address your community's specific risk. And it helped to build upon previous CWPPs with updated science and understanding of fire behavior. So how do we do this? How do we tailor a CWPP to your community? The first thing that we do is we start with our data collection. So again, we're zooming into Golden Gate, going from that community-wide view, zooming in to be able to get a better view of what's the important infrastructure within your community? What are the things that your community values? What are the roadways that might be at risk of wildfire? Or important roadways due to evacuation or other your community within Golden Gate. And so we start with data collection in our initial analyses. This involves collecting information on roadways, various structures, and then HVRAs is highly valued resources and assets. So this is important infrastructure that exists within Golden Gate. We also conducted a ground assessment, which I'll explain here in the next couple slides. And then we pulled in data from other wildfire risk assessments in order to use that for our secondary analyses and modeling. Once we collected all of this data, we ended up engaging the advisory committee as well as other subject matter experts in order to get feedback to ensure that this data that we had collected was as accurate as possible and make sure we weren't missing anything. After we revised this data and the maps that we made at this first step, we then conducted our secondary analyses. So these secondary analyses involve combining wildfire risk with some of these other maps, such as structures and roadways, in order to produce these other outputs. So we conducted Embercast, which I'll talk about here in the next couple slides, as well as evacuation modeling, roadway survivability, and then also looked at relative risk throughout the community. From here, we engaged in partner and community outreach. So again, the advisory committee, as well as other subject matter experts and partners were involved at various points throughout the process. They gave us feedback on the accuracy of the data and the outputs that we were generating, and then also gave some input into how to better tailor that data for the community. With our community outreach, we conducted a mid-project community workshop where we were able to engage with you all community members and residents of Golden Gate in order to better understand your values within the community, your concerns, your barriers to mitigation work, and just collect that feedback and have those conversations, give a presentation on the CWPP, and give opportunities for you all to learn about what it was that we were doing within this process. Additionally, we conducted a very large meeting with various partners and subject matter experts, where we actually identified projects to benefit the entire community and then prioritize those projects to be most feasible and most effective at reducing wildfire risk within the community. So starting off, we had our data collection and initial analyses. At the very beginning of this project, John and I came and visited Golden Gate, your fire protection district, in order to conduct a ground assessment. And so what we did is we were able to travel around the district and look at each of the different parts of the district. We divided your community into different plan units or sections in order to compare the risk within each of those sections. What this ground assessment helped us to do is it helped us to familiarize ourselves with the district, actually get to know your community and see the roadways, the various areas, the mountains, the beautiful views that are unique to your community. And so during this ground assessment, as John and I were traveling around, we examined the characteristic fuels, the different trees, the different species that existed throughout the district. We looked at home ignition zones. We also looked at ignition hazards, and then we examined road conditions as well. And then we visited each of your fire department stations to look at the various apparatus and the various equipment that the stations had. So again, this ground assessment helped us to familiarize ourselves with the district and collect important information and important data that we would use later on in our analyses. Additionally, John collected a ton of data specific to Golden Gate. So again, with the Jefferson CWPP, we were fairly zoomed out because we were looking at things on a county-wide scale. But with this project, we were able to zoom in further and actually identify various pieces of infrastructure that exist throughout the district, as well as various road networks that weren't showing up in that larger countywide CWPP. So because we did this in the beginning, we were able to identify those areas, highly valued resources and assets, various structures within the district, as well as those roadways. We could incorporate those into our later analyses to see how wildfire would affect these this infrastructure that's important to your community. And so in this map here, this is a map that John created once we had compiled a list of each of these are various structures or infrastructure throughout the district, as well as roadways. And then we, again, at every point, we showed the advisory committee as well as other project partners these maps in order to make sure that these were as accurate as possible before we conducted our analyses. And so some of the things that we were looking for here were communication towers, the fire stations, schools, community centers, and various things that we found to be important to your community through outreach and speaking with various partners, as well as your community representatives that were on the advisory committee. So from here, in addition to data that is unique and specific to your community, we also collected data that was generated through wildfire risk assessments. And so some of these include burn probability throughout the district. So this shows various areas and their likelihood to catch fire or to burn. And so this is, again, this is the Title 32 boundary for the Golden Gate Fire Protection District. You can see here, these are the major roads or main roads that run through. And then we can see how that burn probability changes or is different throughout the district. For the map on the right here, this is one of the layers or maps that we pulled from a wildfire risk assessment as well, or the CORA. And so in this map, here we're looking at flame length. And so based on this model, we are able to understand, if a fire were to occur in these different areas, what is the potential flame lengths that we might see? And so the colors refer to various flame lengths. Additionally, we collected type of fire behavior. So is that fire going to stay on the surface? Is it going to start torching up into the trees? So surface fire, a passive crown fire, you see some torching throughout, or an active crown fire where it's burning in the canopy of the trees and moving very quickly through. For this map on the right here, we also looked at fire behavior class. And so if a fire were to burn, we can see that in many parts throughout the district, we'd have very high to extreme fire behavior, which refers to significant control issues. It'd be very hard to control that fire. And so all of these data points are extremely important for our later analyses. So again, we started by collecting data that's specific to Golden Gate and your community. And then we pulled in wildfire risk assessment data so that we can determine your specific risk in your community based on our secondary analyses and our modeling. So once we collected all of that data, again, we spoke to various project partners and the advisory committee in order to ensure that that data was as accurate as possible before we used it for our own modeling and secondary analyses. So moving into this, one of the maps that we created as the Ember Alliance is we were able to take the information that was gathered from the Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment, and we were able to create this Embercast layer. And so what we're seeing here is as that fire, if a fire were to burn in various areas, we can look at the likelihood of those areas being affected by radiant heat, being affected by both radiant heat and short-range embers, or only being affected by long-range embers. So this is our Embercast. And so, for example, in this area, if these fires were to burn, what we would likely see is a majority of this area that's in yellow would be affected by long-range Embercast. So embers that are traveling a long distance from the fire and landing in these areas. Contrasting that with our blue area here, these areas we would expect a fire burning because there are fuels there, fire burning very close to those areas. And so you'd be feeling the radiant heat from that fire burning. And so this just gives us a good idea of how exposed are these areas to wildfire risk. If a fire were to burn in these different areas, how exposed are they? So from this Embercast, what John was able to do was he was able to take those highly valued resources and assets that we identified earlier on and use this Embercast layer in order to determine which of these highly valued resources and assets, which infrastructure, pieces of infrastructure would be exposed to radiant heat or short-range embers. So that's going to be the most damaging, the most destructive. And so we're able to identify based off of our modeling, which of those highly valued resources and assets or which pieces of infrastructure would be exposed to radiant heat or short-range embers. What this does is this allows us to, when we're making recommendations to lower your wildfire risk, we can look at which pieces of infrastructure are exposed here and make those a priority when we're coming up with various projects to lower the overall community wildfire risk. And so again, this was taking that first piece of data, that first map of your infrastructure within Golden Gate and overlaying it with our Embercast to determine the exposure of this infrastructure. And so any of those in red, those are going to be highly exposed to fire, so radiant heat or short-range embers. And then those in blue are not quite, they don't quite have as high exposure. They would be exposed more so to the long range embers that travel longer distances from the fire or from a potential fire. We actually were able to do the same with various structures throughout the district. And so this informed our recommendations for you all as community members and residents in the CWPP to give you recommendations on what to do to lower your risk and to try and protect your home. If you have a greater exposure to radiant heat or short range embers or long range embers, then we could suggest more robust home hardening, which we'll get to later in the presentation. We also conducted evacuation modeling. So what we did here is we wanted to get a general idea. This is not, the purpose of evacuation modeling is not to show exact times, but relative. And so this is based on congestion. And so if we were to evacuate if the entire district were to evacuate, we were able to see, relatively where is there more congestion along some of these main roads. And so again, the purpose of this evacuation modeling is not to inform evacuation decisions, but it's to show us areas that you might find higher congestion to help us prioritize work along various roadways. So we took the outputs from this evacuation modeling and we combined it with our roadway condition modeling. So this map here shows us these main roadways within the district and our roadway networks within the district. And what it also shows are links of that roadway that may, in a fire, if a fire were to burn over that roadway, could experience potentially non-survivable conditions. And so the way that we determine that is we take your road network and then based off of the flame length that we were able to gather from the Colorado Wildfire Risk Assessment, any parts of this roadway where you may experience greater than 8-foot flame lengths, we deem that to be potentially non-survivable. And the reasoning behind that is it's suggested that when we are fighting a fire, if the flame lengths are greater than 8 feet, we would not send a crew in a dozer in front of that flaming front. And so we can extrapolate that to cars as well. And so if there are roadways that have potentially flame lengths that are higher than 8 feet, we wouldn't want folks in cars along that roadway during that time that the fire is burning. And so this is a pretty powerful map here. And also, it expresses some very serious conditions and some serious subjects. But we were able to use this modeling to help come up with recommendations for project partners in order to make these roadways safer in an evacuation. And so taking our evacuation modeling output as well as our roadway conditions, we were able to come up with this map here. And so we're combining both roadway conditions and potential congestion. And so we can see areas within the district and identify those areas where, right here we see this is going to be a higher priority area because we have potentially non-survivable pieces of roadway combined with extreme congestion in the case of, higher in the case of an evacuation or based on our evacuation modeling. And so what we use these outputs for is we want to, the whole point of this first part of our CWPP process is to identify your community's risk. This can be a scary thing. I fully understand that. but it's really important that we identify these areas of risk for your community so that we can start working to mitigate that risk and start working to lower that risk. And so all of these outputs that we created, we combined, and then we ended up having a project identification meeting. We met with our project partners, we met with subject matter experts, and we met with folks from the advisory committee in order to come up with projects to address this risk that was identified here. Additionally, we also wanted to engage you all as a community. We were interested in understanding what are the things that you value within Golden Gate? What are your concerns as it relates to wildfire? What are, your barriers at home to doing mitigation work? Is it hard to dispose of slash? We wanted to understand the context and the specific situation within your community. So our next step was engaging community and our project partners. Our biggest activity or our biggest event for community engagement took place on March 31st. This was the, middle point of our project. And so this was our mid-project community workshop. We were able to see a lot of you all from the community, a lot of different residents, engage and interact with you all, tell you a little bit about the CWPP process. And then you were also, as residents, able to engage and have discussions with the project partners that we were working with, land managers in the area, fire practitioners in the area, in order to learn a little bit more about this process and what does this lead to. So I was extremely happy and excited with the attendance of this event. As you can see by the pictures, we had a lot of community members come out and a lot of you all come out and participate at this event. As I said before, we had our project partners where we were able to engage with you all, talk a little bit about your fire risk, talk about the CWPP process, and then we also had various activities that you all engaged in where we were able to learn a little bit more about your priorities, your values, your concerns, and your barriers to mitigation. So with this meeting, we had different activities here. The first one that you can see in this top photo is we had various prompts, and we were asking folks to respond to those prompts and respond to those questions. Those prompts asked about what are your barriers to mitigation? So why are you unable to, what are some of the barriers to completing mitigation work on your own property? We also wanted to know what are your concerns regarding, wildfire as well as mitigation. We wanted to know what resources or tools would help community members and residents to complete mitigation work on their property. And then we also wanted to know what is it that you value within Golden Gate. A lot of folks talked about the peaceful views and the nature and the beauty that they experience in Golden Gate. And that was important for us to know as well. We also had the activity down here at the bottom where we wanted to know if you all could decide, where would you decide to spend funding or money? What types of projects would you prioritize within your district? And so we had different project categories. We had education and outreach. We had fuel treatment, so thinning trees or doing different treatments in order to reduce trees and wildfire risk. And then we also had district capacity, so giving funding to purchase more equipment for the fire department or to pay for training for your volunteer firefighters. And then additionally, we asked about the types of fuel treatment that you would want to invest in. So we wanted to know what is your highest priority. There was stand scale. So we're looking at, larger swaths of land, treating those areas, cutting trees in those areas, doing different projects in those areas to reduce risk for the overall community. There was also roadway treatments. And so conducting projects along roadways to clear trees off of the roadway so that we make those evacuation conditions and egress routes and those roadway conditions safer for folks. And then we also had home ignition zone or work on individual resident properties. So those were the three options there. So from this community workshop, we were able to learn quite a bit. And so from this graph, we can see that over 40% of people chose, their highest priority is roadway treatment. And we saw that also in your responses to the prompts. A lot of folks named, life and safety as one of their biggest concerns. And one of the biggest things that people repeatedly mentioned was a need for safe egress routes, a need for safe evacuation routes. And so in this case, we have roadway treatments as the highest priority, homeowner mitigation coming in second, and then landscape scale coming in third here. This also shows, in this case here, what our community wildfire concerns are. And so we had a lot of people naming safety and loss of life, specifically referring to, evacuation routes. Additionally, when we looked at barriers as well as resources and tools that would help you all conduct mitigation work on your own property, a lot of people mentioned mitigation assistance, help doing the work, as well as help with slash disposal. And so we took all of this information that you all provided with us and all of these results, and we brought that to the advisory committee when it was time to start identifying projects and making recommendations in order to reduce your community's wildfire risk. So again, this step was extremely important for us. It allowed us to hear your voice. It allowed us to understand your values and your concerns, and then bring that to the project partners in order to incorporate that into the recommendations that we make within the CWPP to address the risk within your community. With that being said, one of the biggest parts of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan process, this is a lot of alliteration here, but is our project prioritization meeting. What this meeting, the purpose of this meeting is we conducted all of these analyses leading up to this. We had a ton of different maps. We were starting to understand what the wildfire risk within your community. We collected information and heard from you all your concerns and your values and your barriers to mitigation. We conducted our own analyses to dive deeper into wildfire risk within the Golden Gate community. And so now it was time to address that risk. How are we going to take what we've learned and come up with recommendations and projects meant to address the wildfire risk within your community? So that is what this meeting was. We held an in-person meeting where we convened project partners, folks from the advisory committee. We had representatives of the community that were there to try and also help give your community a voice in this process. And then we also had subject matter experts and land managers that attended this meeting. And so what we can see in these pictures here is we have all of these maps. These were some of the partners that were involved. So involved in this process, we had representatives from the Fire Protection District, the Sheriff's Office, Jefferson County Open Space, Jefferson Conservation District. We also had Denver Water when we're looking at infrastructure within Golden Gate. We had community representatives. We had the Colorado State Forest Service. We also had the Clear Creek Watershed and Forest Health Partnership, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and then the Ember Alliance. John and I were also there to facilitate this process. So during this meeting, we were able to guide project partners through a series of maps that summarize the risk and the different findings that we made throughout the CWPP process. Based on these findings, the partners were divided up into three groups, and we tried to divide them up with different perspectives and different backgrounds and expertise. And those partners were tasked in those groups with identifying, priority areas to focus on based on hazard and wildfire risk. Once we identified those priority areas, we then looked at the feasibility of conducting or, implementing a project in that area in order to determine, final project area boundaries. So based on all of the work and analyses that we've performed up to this point, the project partners were able to, throughout this process, identify different areas of priority. So once they identified those areas, John was able to put those into a map. And again, we had 3 different groups. And so we were able to see those areas where the groups agreed upon that area as being, high priority or high risk. And so we can see that overlap of the groups. In this case, we see a lot of folks very concerned about this area, specifically for, evacuation and then fire risk. And so what we're seeing in this map here is John was able to take all of the priority areas that each group identified, overlay them together, and then when there were multiple overlaps, we showed that as higher actionable risk within the district. So this was the result of our project prioritization. And from there, we then refined it to actual project areas. And so if we look, we also ended up taking your input as a community. So a lot of you mentioned evacuations and, a concern for having safe evacuation and egress routes. And so what we decided to do is we really focused on these roadways that were identified as high risk. So we can see roadway through here, this roadway through here, and some of these others as evacuation risks. And we identified those as our highest priority projects. And so what we're doing is we're suggesting to the project partners, land managers in the area, that, hey, these are the projects that are of utmost importance. These are high priority projects in order to identify or in order to address the risk that we identified throughout this process. And so what we did is we have all of these laid out on a map. And some of these, as we can see, the Ralston Creek drainage here, this is an important project in order to protect some highly valued infrastructures as far as water infrastructure. So it's really important to have representative from the Clear Creek watershed as well as from Denver Water to give their input and perspective on this. And then we also have roadway work along evacuation routes. And so, we heard what you all were saying, we heard your concerns, and we incorporated that into the identification of these project areas. And then what we did from these roadways, we identified other areas of concern and then kind of expanded out from those roadways. And so we created this overall project table, and this will be in the CWPP. So y'all can look it over when the CWPP comes out. And it basically lines up the project name with our map here. We identify the priority of that project, the project type. So a lot of our first priority projects are roadside treatments. And then we also identify the lead organization. So the partners or the land managers or organizations that are going to take the lead on this project, and then other organizations or folks that would need to be involved in order to make this project successful. So in addition, this is what we like to call our place-based projects. And so we're looking at specific places. So these would be fuel treatments that are aimed at reducing the overall risk within your community. And so that's that physical fire risk in your community. We also wanted to look at programmatic things that we could do. And so based on feedback from you all, the community, as well as conversations with the advisory committee and project partners, we came up with an extensive list of recommendations for, program-based projects. And so these projects have to do with community outreach and education, also helping be able to actually carry out these projects that we identified before. So, how do we increase the capacity to be able to actually carry out these projects? Helping the fire district so that they can respond to wildfires, and they can also help to contribute to the fuel management, evacuation and safety. And then we also had some miscellaneous projects that we identified as well. And so something that I really hope to express is just that through this process, we have these organizations involved. And if you notice, a lot of these organizations are the same ones that were involved throughout the process. So while we were identifying risk, while we were conducting our analyses and we were getting feedback from these project partners, we were also establishing those relationships so that when this CWPP does come out, those relationships between organizations are already established. Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and Open Space and these other organizations have been involved with this project from the beginning, have been involved in the decision making, and therefore, they have more of a stake in this as well. And so this helps to pave the way and lead the way to actually being able to implement these projects and mitigating the risk. So not just leaving it at the CWPP, not just leaving it at this document and the plan, but creating and establishing those relationships so that these projects can be carried out and we can start to address and mitigate your overall risk. So with that, I want to turn it over to Kyle, and I'll let Kyle take it from there.
All right. Thank you so much, Evan. Evan, can you actually do me a favor? Can you put that presentation back up, please? Okay. So I'm just gonna have you drive the presentation as we keep going. So we just heard a lot about the risk in our district. We saw a lot of red, a lot of things that seem scary. And the truth is that Golden Gate Fire, as a district, has done a CWPP before. We did one about 13 years ago, 14 years ago now. And very little was done as a result. And that was one of the very largest criticisms we heard from the community as we moved forward with this process that we found very important. And so now we're going to talk about, so what? What is the fire district doing in result of this process of the CWPP? So the biggest thing that we came away with was, wow, that there's a lot of work to be done. So we, as a district, several months ago, stood up a completely separate division, a preventative division of the fire district that's separate from our operations from emergency response, but is officially called the Wildfire Mitigation Division. It was stood up by a committee that was formed back in August. The committee was comprised of several interested citizens, Golden Gate Fire members, firefighters, and also a Golden Gate board member as a representative. The Wildfire Mitigation Division was built to mirror Jefferson County's new wildland fire management program loosely. There are some things that the wildfire management program has in a little bit more of a robust sense because they're a much larger organization than we are. But we are built to kind of mirror that so that we have counterparts at the county that are very similar to what we have in the district to help us facilitate, like we said, those relationships and help us build forward as a fire district. So we have 3 sections underneath that division. The first is defensible space and home hardening inspections. Throughout the process of the CWPP, especially during the community outreach portion and community feedback, we heard very loud and clear that people want help going through their properties, identifying what needs to be done to make their homes hardened, to make sure that they are getting proper fuel treatments for a home ignition zone. And they needed some help with that. So that first group is our home defensible space and home hardening inspections. We already have hired our 3 people, 3 volunteers. All these people who fill these positions are volunteers. They are not getting paid. They are coming into the district and doing this out of the love of their heart for our community, but are going to be receiving professional training to do this. Some of them already have, to be completely honest with you. So we have 3 people who are filling this position. And this is just to be very clear, these people who are doing the inspections in this section of the program is only for homeowner assistance. It is homeowner generated. So if a homeowner or landowner reaches out to the fire district, we will then send a team out to help that person go through their home hardening checklists, and then also look at their home ignition zone, defensible space, and or potentially even larger mitigation projects if they're interested in that. Help them with marking, help them with decision making, and help them create a plan to move forward with their making their land and their home more fire resistive. This program is not part of Jefferson County's permitting process. So there is no retroactive or negative aspects from participating in the home hardening or defensible space inspections program. So there's no fines, there's no issues with someone coming back and saying, well, you didn't do this on this inspection that came from the fire department. This is only here to help you as a homeowner make your land and your home safer. The second thing we identified was that we needed some more education. We needed, as a district, as a community, we needed to be able to provide better education around wildland fire, around fire mitigation, but separate from what is the defensible space and home ignition zone inspections. So this role is more like someone moves into the fire district from a place that's more urban and has lots of questions about what it means to live in the wildland urban interface. This person is that point of contact, that point of initial education for that group. Also someone who can be there for outreach during community events. And also if anybody else just has random questions from the community about wildfire mitigation, evacuation, anything that has to do with wildfire, that this is now kind of that point person that can reach back out and have the conversations with those people. We have 1 of 2 positions that we had identified already filled for that within the division. And actually, you're going to hear from her next. And then the final thing, actually definitely not least, is a mitigation work crew. As you saw, there's quite a lot of work that's outlined on that map. And a lot of the work that was outlined was given to under the responsibility or primary responsibility of the fire district. In order to get any of that work done, we needed to build our own capacity to do work, which we did not have before. So we stood up a wildfire mitigation work crew. We're calling them basically the crew within the district. I apologize, this was a typo. We have 7 of these positions currently filled with internal applicants from the fire district. So people who are going to be both within operations responding to emergencies as firefighters and EMS responders, and also then going to be contributing additionally to the community as mitigation professionals out there doing work on the roadways and doing larger work for the community's greater good. We also have solicited applications for those positions, and we're going to be holding the interviews for those remaining positions in the next couple of weeks at the very end of November. After we're through with those interviews, we do anticipate that work crew will actually be fully staffed. And again, these are all volunteers. These are people that are not being paid, all the way up to the crew boss, and the crew lead is volunteering his time and his expertise to help us start getting this work done. And then finally, we also added a division administrator. So you may know that we have a division administrator underneath the fire chiefs for operations. And we added a second division administrator underneath myself to help us carry out the administrative tasks involved with the mitigation division. And that position is also filled by another volunteer, a volunteer firefighter who is now actually performing 3 roles within the fire district in official capacity. So we are building forward. We have a lot of people that have already kind of helping us bring this idea that came from the CWPP to life. The CWPP is not already fully published, and we are already actioning on that. So the concerns that we had when we started this process, we are laying them to rest because we are taking off at a sprint, running into the solutions that are presented by the problems that we found during the CWPP. So, Evan, if you want to go to the next slide for me. So with that, we'd like to introduce you to the Wildland Fire Mitigation Division for Golden Gate Fire. This is our official logo. This is if you have ever been into Station 2, this is the Yeti that we have on the wall up in the crew quarters. And he is now our mascot for the mitigation division. Evan will do one more. All right. So we also have a couple target goals for our first year. So first is the full implementation of all sections of the mitigation division. As we said, we're already off at a very fast clip and for implementation here. We're going to start beginning mitigation work, focusing on pre-identified roadway projects that came from our project prioritization exercises. We're going to be again assisting homeowners with our defensible space inspections, and then also a full implementation of our education program. A lot of this work is being assisted by Jefferson County's Wildland Fire Management Program. So our counterparts, when we set up the division, similar to the way that the county is set up, has helped us kind of move at a faster pace and allowed us to have better access to resources and also have some guidance as we move forward. And we hope to continue those relationships and help them bring some kind of fruitful benefit to the community as we move forward. A couple other things that we're looking at for a 1-year target goal implementation that we're already starting to work on is an address sign implementation. So if you have an address sign outside of your home that we can't read, that's a very significant issue during a wildland fire. And we are already starting to implement a process to be able to get really large, big green, super easy to read address signs that will be available through a partnership with the fire district. Also looking at our water availability cistern testing as a project for the fire district next year, and try to create a long-term program that will allow us to test residential cisterns. And then also increasing the availability for advanced wildland fire training for Golden Gate Fire. A bunch of our firefighters are already highly trained in wildland fire. I will be honest with you, my radio is on behind me because we just sent out a tender and a Type 6 engine to a full wildland fire that's currently happening in Gilpin County right now. So we have lots of great experience. We have lots of great wildland firefighters, but we want to make sure that we can bring them up to even higher level of training and expertise and certification. And we're hoping to partner again with the county and their new program and their new fuels crew to bring some of that advanced fire training to our firefighters, as well as sending them to some outside training resources that are available throughout the state to bring some more of that knowledge back into the district. So that's really kind of where the rubber meets the road. This is where we went through this process. We spent a year doing our CWPP. Halfway through it, we decided, hey, we really need to start taking action now. And we're already off and running. And I hope that the community comes back and rallies support for the mitigation division because we're doing some pretty awesome stuff. And with that, I'd like to introduce our new education specialist, Kat Kraft, who's on the call, and she's going to take it from here.
All right. Thank you very much, Chief Benson. Evan, you can skip to the next slide. Okay, so we've gone through a tour of data that indicates that our community is at risk of wildfire. And the work ahead of us now is to adapt to that natural part of the forest ecosystem and reduce its impact by building resilience, both at the homeowner level and at the community level. Every one of us, every property owner in this community plays a role in creating that fire adapted community. What one of us does on our own property benefits that of our neighbor and vice versa. So this is a problem that spans both the individual homeowner across the district throughout our neighborhoods. Next slide, please, Evan. When it comes to the first line defense, that starts at our property, at the individual homes. And as Evan mentioned earlier, some of the analyses that the Ember Alliance performed showed how our homes can be perhaps at risk of ember casting or direct heat exposure or long range ember casts. And we can address a lot of those problems with home hardening techniques. So replacing our wood roof or shingles with non-combustible materials, and then screening vents, clean our gutters. A lot of this is stuff that we're now being required to do in order to procure insurance up in the mountains anyways. So it's best practice for insurance, and it's certainly best practice to keep our homes more resilient from wildfire. I want to say that home hardening, in addition to practicing defensible space, which is kind of a name for the practice of reducing vegetation reducing vegetation most so immediately around the home, and then allowing for increasing amounts of vegetation as we move away from the home out to 100 feet. Home hardening plus defensible space has been shown to more than double the chances of home survival. And numerous studies over and over again have shown that home survivability increases somewhere between 45 and 60% if the homes have implemented home hardening and defensible space practices. So there is something we can do about it. The resilience is not just a dream; it's a decision, and we can implement that at the individual home level. And I want to throw up the Wildland Fire Mitigation Division logo here, because the home assessment crew that can help each landowner by coming out and doing a home hardening and defensible space assessment will help us, each individual, understand how they can attain that increased level of resilience according to those best practices. On to the next slide, please, Evan. All right. Last but not least, just want to call out that this is certainly a neighborhood collaboration or collective action effort. So things that we can do as a community to further increase resilience across the district are participating in the wood slash chipping events that are hosted at the Grange, and supporting and volunteering with the fire department if there are fire protection district as there are opportunities available. And then the Golden Gate Auxiliary. The Golden Gate Auxiliary is always looking for support and volunteer hours, and 100% of your support that you donate to that goes to supporting our wildland fire fighters and the fire protection district. So thank you very much for that. And there are multiple ways to stay informed. We'll try to do education events through our fire protection district wildland fire mitigation division. So whether that be through social or website or other forums. And then want to note also that great information is out there available from the Jefferson County's wildland fire mitigation program, and then also through the Colorado State Forest Service. And I'd be happy to point you in the direction of those resources should you care to find out more. And then you can follow the Fire Protection District on the website, on social. And lastly, want everyone to know that you'll probably sleep better at night if you have your evacuation route picked and a go bag ready. And the fire department, in addition to that, or the fire protection district, sorry about that, is they're always wanting to have a good inventory up to date on water resources that are available for firefighting. And then, as Chief Benson already mentioned, having clear home address signage is a big plus should firefighters ever have to respond to and protect our homes. Evan, next page. All right. So I think I would just want to close. Oh, sorry, my daughter's yelling at me in the background here. It's bedtime. So I just want to close that wildfire is a part of living in the mountains, but so is an amazing community. One of the great parts of living up here is that we all rely on each other for a cup of sugar and perhaps help clearing a tree. We're all in this together, and we can build resilience as a team. With that, I'll close it up. Thanks. Pass it back to you, Evan.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kat. I really appreciate that message there at the end specifically too. Really informative. Um, so I wanted to just here at the end as well give John White with the sheriff's office if you had anything you wanted to add. I know big messages sign up for emergency alerts. I know that was part of Kat's message as well, but wanted to John, if give you an opportunity, if you wanted to say anything more on that as well.
All right, this is working. Yeah, that's really the one thing I just wanted to mention is encourage people to sign up for lookout alerts. I can drop a link into the chat.
You can chat it to me, John, and I can get it out to everyone. The permissions only allow me to distribute it to the whole group.
But yeah, and the sheriff's office, we're very busy. I could give an update a little bit. We've hired about 4 crew members right now, and we're in the process of hiring another 16. We have our GIS specialists, our grant specialists, 2 FMOs. We're aggressively hiring and building out the program. I've been meeting with lots of partners, looking at projects for the mitigation crew, and we're in the process of getting our agreements figured out with different entities to work on different land ownerships. We've bought a lot of equipment, 1 engine, we're gonna buy another engine, chipper, skidder, masticator, trailers, trucks. So we're getting pretty built out as a program. And yeah, excited to get working out here in the Golden Gate, especially on Golden Gate Canyon Road. And if anyone has any questions, let me know. Carrie, that's the exact link I was going to send you. That's perfect.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And so to round this out and finish up here, just update for the final document. We are in the final stage of revision. There will be a summary document to accompany the CWPP. It is a, very long, very large document. But this summary document will accompany to summarize useful information for homeowners, similar to what Kat had presented on today. And once that document is out, it will be hosted and posted by our organization, the Ember Alliance, also Golden Gate Fire Protection District, and then you can also find the CWPP at the Colorado State Forest Service webpage as well. And it'll be broken up or is broken up into different sections. And so there is a section on recommendations for homeowners. And so that would be a really important section for you all to take a look at in addition to the summary document. So with that, I also wanted to give thanks to our project partners and appreciation for all their hard work throughout this process. And Kyle, I'll turn it over to you if you have any closing remarks.
Sure. So yeah, well, again, I want to echo that. I want a huge thank you to all of the folks that are on this page, the Forest Service, the Sheriff's Office, Parks and Wildlife, Open Space, Clear Creek Watershed and Forest Health Partnership, Denver Water, City of Golden Fire Department, Jefferson Conservation District, United Power, XL Energy. I'm sure there's some more partners on here that helped us throughout this process. But I also really want to thank the Ember Alliance. This project has taken the better part of 12 months. Actually, I think we're close to 13 months at this point. And it is a huge undertaking to do a CWPP. So the very extensive effort and time and energy that was expended by both Evan and John and the team over at Ember Alliance is greatly appreciated by the fire district. And I also want to thank our community for supporting us in this process. This has been a really important step forward for the fire district, and I'm looking forward to having it inform our next 5 years of the future. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kyle. It was a pleasure working with you all and excited to see where it goes from here. So with that, we will open it up to questions. Again, if you all have questions, you can either put it in the chat or use the raise your hand feature, and Carrie can filter those for us so that we can address any questions you all might have.
No questions from the chat so far. All right, I see Meredith. I'm going to ask you to unmute and go ahead and ask your question.
Well, first, I'd just like to say that it says chat disabled, so it might be hard.
Okay, you should be, folks that do have questions, you should be able to chat to me, but I'll check those settings. So thank you, Meredith.
Okay. I would like to know when the full report is available. Will that include, well, ways to display, enlarge, view all of those maps to focus in on specific small areas?
So
in other words, if I see a page size report of a map of the entire district with all of those, say, fire links, I want to be able to focus in on the area of my neighborhood. Will that be available to us?
So as far as the purpose of those maps, John is packaging up all of those maps and the work that we've done with those analyses, and that will be given to the fire protection district. As far as, there is a caveat with the modeling is that it's not meant to zoom into individual homes. That's where we came up with the, homeowner recommendations based off of the ground assessments that John and I did. But those maps, just the resolution on that, it's more meant to show areas of relative risk and looking, we take those as a whole. And so a lot of those maps are not meant to be zoomed into the homeowner level. But that's where we do include the homeowner recommendations as well. And those are based too on the different areas of the fire protection district. So we actually tailor some of those recommendations, or tailor like what is higher risk within those areas.
Meredith, we will be making those maps available digitally on the district website, so that if someone did want to kind of put them up and zoom them in on a computer to be able to see them a little bit clearer than just a single page, that will be available. But again, the data that's available to us at the level that we have to do modeling is not necessarily all the way down to the individual homeowner. We could probably zoom it in and say, and Evan, correct me if I'm wrong, but based off of a specific plan unit, based off of a specific maybe a neighborhood scale, that we can see it at that level, but not necessarily like per your specific lot or home.
I certainly meant neighborhoods, not homes. So yes, okay, if we can have that availability, that would be great.
Thanks, Meredith. I'm going to put you on mute and move to a question that we have from the chat. So Suzanne Wheeler asks, our community is surrounded by and intertwined with county and state land. Can someone comment on what JCOS and CPW are committing to do regarding fire mitigation?
Yeah, Suzanne. So both Jefferson County Open Space was involved with the project prioritization process. And actually, I see Tony has his hand up, so I'll actually turn it over to you, Tony.
Yep, I just gave Tony co-host, I believe. Yep, there we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Well, hi there, everyone. Tony Ancello with Jefferson County Parks and Open Space. Yeah, we're really happy to be a partner in this whole process. We are so the big property we own in this area would be White Ranch, and that is one of the identified priority projects in the area. Because it is not a major evacuation route or anything like that, it did end up with a little bit lower priority on the project rating, but it's still something we're very committed to at Parks and Open Space. We have it on the docket to do work sometime around 2028, 2029, or 2030. Sometime within that time period, we're looking at doing some work up there, and the parcels are indicated in the CWPP maps. But I can certainly answer any other questions about that.
Thanks, Tony, and thanks, Suzanne, for that question. I have another question in the chat. When is mitigation scheduled to start? And that is from Marge. I'm not sure if that's directly to JCOS. I think that might be larger fire protection district.
Yeah, I can answer that question. So we are looking to try to start doing mitigation. Ideally, we were planning to try to start by the end of the year. Due to the realities around onboarding and training and all of the steps we need to take with that, it may not be until spring, early spring, that we start doing some of that project work. But it also depends on what the weather looks like. You know, if we have a weather window where we can get some project work done, get some chipping done, then we're gonna start putting that crew to work as soon as we possibly can.
Thanks, Kyle. Evan, it looks like that is the end of the chat questions that we have.
Awesome. Well, I just want to say thank you all again for attending this meeting. It's great to see a lot of the community out and in support and interested in the CWPP. Thank you also to all of the project partners that were on the call. Thank you to Kyle and Kat as well for helping with the presentation and just throughout the process. So I look forward to seeing what mitigation work and whatnot comes from the CWPP, and excited to get that CWPP finished and published for you all to be able to see here very shortly. So thank you all. And thank you to Carrie for running our tech. Very much appreciate it.
Thank you, Evan.